From outside the Stanley Moss Courthouse in downtown Los Angeles, I'm Keely Eure here with Dan Weber for instant analysis of the opening statements in the Todd McNair versus the NCAA trial. And before we get started, special thanks to our sponsor, Platinum Storage Groups and Real Estate Investors. Day one of the first day of the trial, it was a lot to take in. As Judge Schaller said, after hearing both sides, I think we're ready for deliberation. So the opening statements were pretty heated. Some shots were taken, but it was interesting to hear both sides and what they had to say.
Yeah, you certainly got to see which direction they're going in, and how, in some ways, they're talking past one another. You know, when Bruce Boylett, speaking for Todd McNair, is really keying in on the mistakes that the NCAA made in questioning Todd and then calling him a liar because he didn't give him the right answers, and saying, well, he could have figured it out later on, blah, 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 is kind of their response. And the second part of that is just the way I think Bruce Boylett made it more of a personal thing about Todd and what he's gone through. And the NCAA comes back, and now what they have really focused on was hey, we just made the best call we could, and maybe there were some mistakes were made, and they admit about the email and some of the emails and the question that they got the year wrong and who made the call and all those kinds of things that Todd's attorneys are focusing on. But they basically, the one thing they're really coming after is that Todd should have worked harder to get a job, and that it's Todd's fault that he hasn't had a job or hasn't been hired. And the case that that they're making for Todd was basically, when you strike out at your own school where you were an All-American, where they want to hire you and they won't hire you, or when an NFL coach who wants to hire you and is close to hiring you, and the owner comes in and says you can't hire this guy, they wanted to make the case that he really did give it a try, and that he's done all sorts of, he drives for Uber and, different little football things, and that he is going back to work next year at a high school. Yep. And hoping to get back into the game. So, we'll see how that plays out. But it was interesting how they're kind of talking past one another a little bit and trying to guess what the other one is going to do.
Yeah.
And who they're going to put on. Well, they know who they're going to put on, how they're going to try to, turn the testimony in their favor. So it was interesting. I mean, let's face it, the NCAA has some really good attorneys, and obviously Bruce Boylett is one of the very best. There are people who say he's the best trial lawyer in California. So it's interesting stuff.
So like we said, this was a marathon of a day, multiple hours of opening statements. So we're going to go by each side and say the main points of each argument. For Todd McNair's side, I thought Bruce Boylett did a good job of making himself appear personal to the jury, as well as Todd McNair, making this a personal thing. Also, it was interesting how he went into the point of contention between the NCAA and Todd McNair of the sanctions and how they came to that and how they sanctioned USC before and after the Todd McNair came to consensus.
Yeah, I think Bruce is kind of a naturally low-key, very friendly, easygoing, makes great eye contact. Just, if something would go wrong, they've got all kinds of audio-visual stuff and projecting things on the screen. And he would say it was his, oh, that's my mistake, or he'd put his glasses on and said, well, we need it that size because, it helped. He's really good at that. I mean, I would say, in terms of connecting with the jury, you can't do it any better. I think the Kostas Stojakovic for the NCAA, I think, is more of a kind of a young law school professor kind of lecturing to maybe a freshman class about how this is, and he's also talking to them about the NCAA. I thought it was interesting. If you wanted to look at two different approaches, if you looked at what Bruce Boylett did, for Todd, he showed the three observers on the Committee on Infractions. Basically, that was it. You didn't see much about the 8 voting members. You saw the people that were writing those emails, the people that wanted to basically, get rid of Todd and didn't think he should be allowed anywhere in college athletics were the 3 observers who didn't have a vote. The NCAA, when they put up their slide, all they're showing you are the 8 voting members, and they kept showing you their pictures, and these are good people and blah, blah, blah. And these people are just they're kind of sidelights. They're not really important to the case. So they kind of have two completely different visions of how they came to the verdict in the USC case and where Todd McNair fit. But I thought it was interesting, and I don't know that we've ever known this exactly. Bruce Burlett said, going through the records, here were the penalties that USC was going to get without Todd McNair's involvement, without his guilty finding on Todd McNair. USC was going to drop from 25 scholarships to 22, and they were going to get 1 year of a bowl ban. That was it. After the Todd McNair finding, instead of losing 3 scholarships, they lose 30. Yep. So they get dropped to 15 scholarships a year that they could. USC was going to be only able to give 22, and they dropped that 7 more, so down to 15, and then so that's a loss of 30 over 3 years. The other thing is, in the original penalties, USC was going to be able to have no more than 82 players on scholarship instead of 85. Well, that's probably almost negligible. With the NCAA rule and losing those 30 original scholarships, there were games when USC had 43, 45, originally recruited scholarship players. So that's a big difference. Yeah. Now the NCAA attorney comes in and says, no. We say that the penalties eased up as they went through the 3-day, 4-day deliberation, and then they got back home and they were still deliberating by emails and on conference calls and all that. But they totally contradict one another there. Yeah. As Judge Schaller said, opening statements are not evidence. It looks like evidence, kind of, and they make it seem like evidence, but the evidence is still to come. But I thought that was the thing that just jumped out at me. Had this only been, the original penalties, that USC could have had 82 scholarships, they would have had 1 year bowl ban, and could have recruited 22 scholarship kids a year, would have been about probably what most people think it should have been. Mm. And then they whacked them big time. I think the NCAA is going to have to explain how did they get from here to here, because they're saying we didn't really go after Todd McNair, and it wasn't really that important, and we really were pretty easy on Todd McNair. Well, then you want to say, because they say, he didn't do that much. But then you say, well, then how do you penalize USC the way you penalize USC? I think they need to answer that.
Yeah. And it was interesting because Costa then came up after Bruce and said, you're probably wondering how I follow that up. And I think he actually did a pretty good job of doing that. He made a compelling case. One of the main arguments was taking Lloyd Lake's word versus Todd McNair's. And they definitely went at Todd McNair's integrity that way. What did you have to think about the argument?
The one member of the Committee on Infractions says, well, Todd McNair just tried to explain away everything. And it was like, isn't that what you're supposed to do? If they say, you made 3 phone calls to Lloyd Lake's phone, and the reason you did was because Reggie Bush had lost, his phone had died and he had given you this number, aren't you supposed to explain? Yeah, I was calling Reggie, I wasn't calling Lloyd Lake. So I think you do have to, explain some things away. I think it's really going to be important what, and they said it's going to be about 7 hours worth, Todd McNair on the stand. Yep. But as you listen to this, you think, how interesting if Lloyd Lake could be on the stand, because Lloyd Lake kind of left it up in the air, kind of some of the stuff. He sort of kind of maybe, and he's not going to be testifying here, but there are going to be things that we're not going to be able to answer. And I guess the question is, why did the NCAA panel, when they really had kind of a flip a coin situation where did Todd McNair really know Lloyd Lake and Michael Michaels when they came up behind him in a bar and had their picture taken with him, or didn't he? Who knows? I mean, how do we know that? So basically, in every case, they believed multiple felon Lloyd Lake rather than Todd McNair. Why? That's, I think, the question. I think the NCAA really has to answer that question. Why did they find Todd McNair not believable and Lloyd Lake totally believable? Lloyd Lake, who was trying to get several $100,000 from Reggie. And his one threat that he had over Reggie was going to the NCAA. So I think we need to maybe hear more about that.
Mm-hmm. The other key argument that the NCAA is making is, did the NCAA directly cause Todd McNair to not get a job going forward? And they mentioned how Todd McNair never hired an agent. He never put out a formal job application, and he only texted or called 6 coaches going forward. So they're going to have to prove, did the NCAA actually cause Todd McNair to not find a job going forward?
Because I think that's a hard argument to make when the reason he doesn't have a job, and USC will tell you, they didn't renew his contract, but after while the new coaching staff came on, he was still kept on with Lane Kiffin. He was not dismissed, and so my guess is he would have stayed on board. And I don't know if they said, well, nobody here from USC is going to testify to that, so I don't know again if that'll be something that's left in the air. One of the things I wondered about, though, in the NCAA approach was they were saying that Todd's attorneys are telling you that these people on the Committee on Infractions are like jurors, and that they shouldn't have been tampered with, and they shouldn't have been influenced from the outside, and they should have been impartial. And he basically said, no, these are really smart people. They know what they're doing. They're more like judges, not like you dummies in the jury. I mean,
he didn't say that, though.
No. Now, this is my conclusion. I'm just saying, if I'm sitting in the jury and he's telling me these guys weren't jurors, they were judges, because they really are experts. Now, obviously, if you're in that jury, you probably have almost never heard of the NCAA, because if you did ever hear it, you probably aren't in that jury. But I just thought that might have been one of those lines that I wouldn't have, if somebody would have said, I'm going to say this, I would have said, I don't think I might say that these NCAA people are smart like judges, because they know what they're, and you guys don't know anything about this stuff. So I don't know. That's just me.
What are your big general takeaways from today, opening statements?
Well, I mean, the NCAA is serious. They're they're spending millions of dollars on this defense. Yeah. They went out and got as good a trial people as you could find in the entire country. So they're hiring people that have defended complex cases, big organizations who know what they're doing, and they're doing the best they possibly can, I think, in this case. But again, they're representing a big, kind of faceless organization, which might be why they're putting up that slide that has all the photos of all the people on the Committee on Infractions and saying, oh, they're from really good schools and they're really good people, blah, blah, blah. It might be harder for them to personalize it. Now, they keep saying, you'll see the evidence and they'll explain to you how they did what they did. But they're playing some defense. They're playing some good defense, but they know they got to play defense. And I don't think Bruce Broilette ever said mistakes were made, or we did things we shouldn't have done, or the guy who wrote the one email, he was demoted, and the NCAA president, who originally said, I think they got it right, said, this guy got it wrong, and he shouldn't have. So they know they have to back off. But what he eventually said was, but I don't think it's worth millions and millions of dollars in damages. Yeah. He definitely got to that eventually. So what they're trying to say, and maybe they're just trying to limit the numbers here. But I thought it was really a very good kind of back and forth and it's amazing how well they must have anticipated one another's case. They really, they get all the depositions, so they know what they're asking the people who aren't going to be here, so you can tell how thoroughly they analyze what they ask in the depositions, and they're definitely playing. It was interesting to watch that, how it kind of matched up.
Yeah, it's kind of like a legal dance, if you will. Going forward, we don't have a set schedule of what who we're gonna hear from next. I know we're kind of heard what's gonna happen tomorrow. We will have a deposition for half of the day, and then we will have a live testimony for the second half of the day. Who are we expecting to hear from?
So I think the deposition is one of the observers who, and the excuse that the NCAA used was for those guys writing those emails, like the 7-page email and the really where they ripped Todd, was Well, they were newcomers. That was their first time on the committee. They weren't really sure what they were supposed to do. But I think we're going to hear from one of those, Roscoe Howard, I believe, on a deposition. And I think the other one, who was the observer, Rodney Uphoff, is going to be here in person. So not tomorrow necessarily. Yeah. Tomorrow, I think, in person, is a witness that they've been kind of arguing about, Angie Creters, who was an NCAA investigator, kind of one of the two with Richard Johannenmeyer, two lead investigators in this case. And she was involved in the day when USC wanted to be able to be there when they talked to Lloyd Lake, and the NCAA made all kinds of, gave all kinds of reasons why USC couldn't be there, and USC was really unhappy about it. And so she's going to have to probably explain that whole day and how they got Lloyd Lake there and how they kept USC from being there, because they would have liked USC and Todd would have probably liked to be able to ask Lloyd Lake some questions, and they've never gotten a chance to do that.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for the Todd McNair NCAA trial, day 4. We'll see you tomorrow for day 5.